I wanted to dive deeper and take a closer look at the Hoover Dam and just how crucial it is to our state, our region, and the entire nation.
Imagine waking up to a morning when one of America's greatest engineering wonders can no longer do the job it was built to do. Hoover Dam, the shield that has powered cities and sustained life across the Southwest, is edging toward a number that engineers fear: 895 feet. That level is called dead pool, and if Lake Mead falls that far, the consequences could hit homes, water systems, farms, and power across a massive region. So, how did a multi-billion-dollar rescue effort bring us this close to the edge? This is the story.
It was a conquest, it was a controlling of nature.
Nothing like it had been achieved before, and many thought it couldn't be done.
It was a bold idea on a scale that truly had not been seen in dam construction before.
The white scar of Lake Mead leave Las Vegas behind and follow Highway 93 toward Black Canyon, and before Hoover Dam even takes center stage, something else steals your attention. It is not the concrete wall. It is not the bridge hanging above the canyon. It is not even the water itself. It is the white ring, stretched across the canyon walls like a scar that refuses to fade. At first glance, it almost looks artificial, like someone painted a bright stripe across the dark rock to make a point. But that line was not painted by human hands. It was drawn by loss. Year after year, Lake Mead kept shrinking, sliding lower and lower, exposing more of the canyon and leaving behind a pale mark of where the water used to stand. What you are seeing is not just a stain. It is a history lesson written in stone. That is what makes the ring so unsettling. It says in one silent image what charts, speeches, and headlines often fail to say with the same force. This lake has fallen a long way. It has lost an enormous amount of water, and the proof is right there in front of you. Even when a few better snow seasons gave the lake a temporary boost, that ring did not go away. It stayed behind like a warning, reminding everyone that a brief rise is not the same as real healing. And once you notice it, the dam itself almost feels like the second warning. Lake Mead was built to feel vast, stable, and almost untouchable. At full pool, it can hold about 26 million acre-feet of water, with the surface reaching 1,221 feet above sea level. Today, it sits far below that mark, still carrying the visible signs of years of decline. That is why the white ring matters so much. It does not need to shout. It does not need drama. It simply stands there, honest and impossible to ignore. The ring on the canyon wall is a proof that the water never truly came back. But what exactly makes the dam's condition so alarming? And why has it become such a serious concern for engineers? Now, let's uncover how Hoover Dam is nearing its most dangerous limit.
A dam of this size had never been built. It was enormous. Many people said it was impossible. It would never happen.
The 895-foot threshold. There is a number at the center of this crisis, and once it enters your mind, it is hard to shake. 895 feet. On paper, it may look like one more measurement in a long list of lake levels and engineering terms. In reality, it is the line that separates strain from breakdown. Engineers call it dead pool, the point where Lake Mead drops so low that Hoover Dam can no longer move water through its system the way it was built to. That matters far more than most people realize. Hoover Dam is not only a massive wall of concrete standing across Black Canyon, it is also a power plant that depends on pressure, motion, and force. Water falls from the lake, rushes down through huge pipes, and hits turbines with enough energy to create electricity. The process sounds simple, but it depends on one thing staying strong: the height of the water. When the lake falls, the pressure falls with it. When the pressure weakens, the dam weakens too. That is why every single foot matters. Hoover Dam does not wait for one dramatic moment to fail. It starts losing strength little by little. Power output drops. The room to respond gets smaller. Emergency equipment has to step in. By the time Lake Mead hit its low point in 2022, Hoover's electricity output had already fallen hard enough that low water turbines had to be added just to keep the system going. That should have been a louder warning than it was. One of the most famous engineering achievements in American history was already leaning on emergency support, and many people barely noticed. So, When you hear 895 feet, do not hear a distant number from an engineer's report. Hear the level where a water crisis begins turning into a far bigger danger for the Southwest. Hear a threshold that could strain power and water across communities that have depended on Hoover Dam. The ring along the reservoir shows that Hoover Dam is no longer seen only as a safeguard, but as a warning. But how did it reach this frightening point? And could decisions that were never meant to cause harm still lead to this state? Let's uncover the details.
You can imagine for the laborers who built the Hoover Dam in a remote site to see this gargantuan project in concrete rising up from the canyon floor. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before.
The fatal miscalculation of 1922. To understand why Lake Mead now feels like a warning sign instead of a safety net, you have to travel back to 1922. That was the year 7 western states sat down to divide the Colorado River and turn one water source into the foundation of an entire region. Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming believed they were making a smart and lasting deal. With this agreement, cities could expand, farms could spread, homes could be built, and industry could grow. It looked like a bold plan for order, progress, and stability in the American West. But hidden inside that promise was a mistake so large it would shape the next century. The men at that table believed they understood the river because of the flow records in front of them. The problem was that those records came from an unusually wet period. The Colorado River looked stronger, fuller, and far more dependable than it truly was over time. Later studies, including tree ring research reaching back hundreds of years, showed something deeply troubling. The river's normal flow was much lower than the states had assumed. In plain terms, they divided water the river could not keep producing, year after year. That error did not stay on paper. It spread into real life. Laws were written around it. Cities rose because of it. Farms depended on it. Massive reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell helped hide the shortfall for decades by storing extra water and making the system look more secure than it really was. But a hidden problem only stays hidden while the savings hold. Once reservoir levels began to fall, the old mistake came into full view. Suddenly it showed up everywhere, in shrinking shorelines, weaker hydropower, harder water cuts, and growing fear across the basin. What once looked like a triumph of planning now feels like a long, expensive promise built on a river that was never big enough. The 1922 agreement put more pressure on the river than it was ever meant to carry. But was that the only reason things reached this dangerous point? Or was there another force quietly making the situation worse? Now, let's explore how a 1,200-year water shortage pushed Lake Mead deeper into crisis.
The story of the Hoover Dam's epic construction continues to inspire engineers worldwide. But a century after its construction, the dam faces significant challenges from climate change as rain and water shortages weaken its output.
The mega drought tightening its grip on Lake Mead. Even if the 1922 water deal had been the only problem, the Southwest would still be facing a serious crisis. But the river is carrying something far worse on top of that old mistake. A drought so long and so severe that researchers say it may be the harshest extended dry period in at least 1,200 years. That fact changes the entire meaning of what is happening at Lake Mead. This is not a dry year that will be forgotten after one wet winter. It is not a short slump that can be repaired with a few storms in the Rockies. It is a deep, grinding lack of water that has stayed in place for years, pressing harder and harder on a river system that was already stretched beyond comfort. The Colorado River was already being asked to feed farms, power cities, supply homes, and satisfy legal promises that were too large. Then this historic drought arrived and squeezed the system even further. That is why Lake Mead feels so uneasy now. The lake is not dropping only because of one bad season. It is dropping because the entire basin is under pressure from a long period of dryness that keeps taking more than it gives back. Less snowmelt reaches the river. Less runoff makes it into the reservoirs. Less stored water remains to soften the blow. The extra cushion that once made the system seem strong has been wearing away year after year. And that is what makes this moment so unsettling. What people are seeing is not a brief setback. It is not a temporary dip that can be brushed aside with hopeful headlines. It is a warning sign from a river that has been under strain for far too long. Once you understand the scale of this drought, Lake Mead stops looking like a lake that just needs one good season. It starts looking like proof of something much bigger. A water system pushed into one of the driest chapters in its long history, with very little room left for error or delay now. Beyond the drought and the drop in water levels, what happened to the water meant to flow into the dam? Could something else have been reducing that flow before it ever reached Lake Mead? Now, let's unravel how water disappears before it can save Lake Mead.
The environmental impact is, it's a no-brainer that it's been done already, and therefore to be able to use it and increase the utility of that location, that's going to make a lot of sense in a lot of locations.
The silent thief. But drought is only one part of what is draining Lake Mead. The deeper problem is even more unsettling because some of the water loss happens so quietly that most people never notice it. Even in years when the mountains get more snow, even when winter seems generous, the system can still lose a surprising amount of that water before it ever reaches Hoover Dam. The loss starts high in the basin, moves through the soil, and continues into the air. The Colorado River Basin is warmer now than it used to be, and that extra heat changes the whole path of snowmelt. Snow may still fall in the Rockies, and on paper, that can look like good news. But when warmer temperatures arrive, the snow melts into a landscape that is often dry and thirsty. The ground soaks up more of that water before it can reach streams, rivers, and reservoirs. So, the relief people expect from a snowy winter does not always make it downstream in the way they imagine. Then comes another quiet drain: evaporation. Lake Mead is not simply a giant storage tank holding water in place until people need it. Under desert heat, it is also constantly losing water back into the sky. Day after day, sunlight and high temperatures pull small amounts away. One day alone may not seem alarming, but over weeks, months, and years, that steady loss becomes enormous. That is why this problem feels so hard to escape. Drought explains why there is less water in the system to begin with. Heat explains why even the water that does arrive often fails to provide the relief people are counting on. A stronger snow season can slow the decline, and it may buy time, but it does not automatically restore safety. Much of that gain can vanish before it truly helps. And that is what makes 895 feet feel even more threatening. Lake Mead is not only dealing with shortage, it is also dealing with a hidden theft, where part of every recovery begins disappearing before it can fully matter. Heat is another major reason the water at the dam keeps dropping. But what was done to stop the crisis from getting worse? Was the intervention truly enough? And did it actually relieve the growing pressure? Now, let's uncover how an emergency plan kept the system alive without truly solving the problem.
At the time of its construction in the early 1930s, nothing like it had been achieved before, and many thought it couldn't be done. It's the tallest concrete dam in the U.S.
Billions spent, danger delayed. When officials realized Lake Mead was falling into dangerous territory, they did what governments do in a crisis. They spent amounts of money trying to hold the system together. New low-water turbines were brought in. Intake systems were redesigned. Pipes, pumps, and key water facilities across the basin were repaired, upgraded, and pushed harder than they were ever meant to. Billions of dollars went into one urgent goal: keep the water flowing, keep the power on, and buy the Southwest more time. Nothing captured that effort more clearly than Las Vegas's emergency intake, known as the third straw. The name sounds small, almost ordinary, but the project itself was enormous. Southern Nevada saw the danger before many others were ready to face it. Las Vegas gets most of its drinking water from Lake Mead, yet the older intake pipes had been built for a lake that was expected to stay much higher. As water levels kept dropping, leaders realized the city needed a way to reach deeper water or risk losing access to its supply. So they drilled a massive tunnel through solid rock beneath the lake, far below the older intakes. It was not a dramatic stunt, it was a survival move. Pat Mulroy, who led the Southern Nevada Water Authority for years, warned again and again that waiting would be reckless. Critics said she was pushing fear too hard. In the end, her warning looked less like fear and more like foresight. When Lake Mead later fell to alarming lows, that tunnel no longer looked extreme. It looked like the reason taps in Las Vegas could still run. But the deeper truth never changed. The third straw cannot heal the river. It cannot refill the lake, end the interstate fight, or create water that does not exist. It is not a solution. It is a lifeline. And that is the uneasy heart of the multi-billion-dollar effort. It bought time, but not safety. The multi-billion-dollar lifeline helped Las Vegas hold on, yet it could not save the river itself. But how deeply were the river's problems felt? Was this a crisis people could just live through? Or was it already causing harm on a much wider scale? Let's find out.
Could we rebuild the Hoover Dam? I think we can. Should we build the Hoover Dam? That's a different question, a more complex question.
The human-cost Lake Mead can no longer hide. This crisis is often told through numbers, policies, and giant pieces of concrete, but that can hide the most painful part of the story. Real people are already living with the consequences. This is not only about dams, engineers, or water agreements signed long ago. It is about families watching the ground beneath them change. In Arizona, many farmers were among the first to feel the impact. Once shortage rules began to take hold, some of the earliest cuts landed on areas with lower priority water rights. Fields that had produced crops for years started drying out. Land that once grew cotton, alfalfa, and grain slowly turned hard, dusty, and cracked. For some families, this was far more than lost income. It meant seeing a way of life, built over generations, begin to slip away. Tribal communities felt that pressure too, and in some ways even more deeply. For many of these communities, water rights were not simply handed over. They had to be fought for through long court battles, federal talks, and years of patience. So, when falling supplies begin to eat into those rights, the pain goes beyond money. It touches history, identity, and the weight of promises that were never easy to secure in the first place.
We have a decrease of about 25% of our capacity in producing power because of the lower lake levels.
Then Lake Mead began showing something even more unsettling. As the water dropped lower and lower, it started giving back things it had hidden for decades. Human remains, old boats, and objects long buried beneath the surface began rising from the mud. These stories spread fast because they were shocking and eerie, but each one was pointing to the same truth. The lake had fallen so far that the past itself was starting to reappear. That may be one of the most haunting parts of all. Lake Mead is not only shrinking, it is uncovering what used to stay hidden. It is no longer just a reservoir. In a strange way, it has become a witness. So, this is not only a warning about tomorrow. In many places, the damage has already started today. Lake Mead's retreat is already affecting families, farms, and tribal communities. But will these hardships end anytime soon? Or could what lies ahead be more devastating? Let's uncover the details.
Lake Mead essentially acts like a bank account. There's water that's flowing in, and then there's water that's flowing out for agriculture and for energy production.
The coming reckoning. Everything that has been postponed, watered down, or pushed into the future is now racing toward one deadline. In 2026, the rules that manage Colorado River shortages will expire. When that happens, 7 states, the federal government, and Mexico will all be forced to face one brutal question. Who gets less? That is where this crisis becomes more tense, because every side has a case that sounds reasonable, and none of those cases creates extra water. The upper basin states argue that they should not be blamed for decades of heavier use downstream. The lower basin states point to big cities, major farming regions, and years of painful cuts they have already absorbed. Mexico also has treaty rights that cannot simply be ignored because the numbers have turned ugly. Upstream, Lake Powell is under pressure too, which means there is no hidden rescue waiting. Everyone has an argument. The river has limits. That is why 895 feet feels like far more. Then an engineering number. It feels like the point where 100 years of delay finally run out of room. If Lake Mead keeps dropping, Hoover Dam will still stand in Black Canyon. The concrete will look massive. The structure will still inspire awe. But without enough water behind it, the dam stops being what people believed it was. It stops feeling like protection. It starts feeling like a warning. And that may be the most chilling part of all. The Southwest is not waiting for one dramatic moment when everything suddenly crashes. It is watching a slower kind of failure unfold in plain sight. A little more water gone, a little less power, tougher cuts, deeper intake tunnels, drier farmland, harder talks. Another year of relief that still does not solve the real problem. So, the true fear is not only that 895 feet exists, it is that the whole system keeps edging toward it, while nearly everyone admits the math is broken, yet still struggles to live with what that means. That is why Hoover Dam's gamble feels so alarming. It is not failing all at once. It is failing slowly, publicly, one white mark higher on the canyon wall at a time. So, what do you think about the condition of Hoover Dam? Could what lies ahead be more disastrous? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.